Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the host for government and political matters, and today we have somebody from our local government. We have the police chief of Hudson, Geoff Willems. Chief, welcome to the show.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
You are a repeat guest, but I think it's been a while since we had you on.
It's been a few years, definitely pre-COVID.
Yes, I think we had you on when you first got appointed. And we were just kind of talking off air. So you have now been chief 5 years as of April, is that
Yes,
right?
sir. Yep, 5 years.
Wow. So this is basically going to be a 5-year catch-up. And it's not like you had any kind of events that happened since you become chief.
No, you know, it's been really quiet the last 5 years. Nothing big has happened in the world at all.
Yeah. So obviously we're being facetious and sarcastic because, public safety got a big hit. Right after COVID started, we had the George Floyd incident in the Twin Cities, and then that had ripple effects throughout our nation. We had large cities calling for defunding of police and so forth, campuses, similar thing. And we had in the school area, which I'm on school board, we had some schools that were taking their resource officers out of the schools. I think now they regret that, and we're seeing basically a movement back to what the policies were basically pre-COVID. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, that's what we've seen too. And even a step further from the support in our individual communities, they've started to see what happens if they don't have any law enforcement officers working. They see what happens if they don't have the support they need and the training they need and the budgets they need, and they're starting to realize they do like us around once in a while.
Exactly. But then in the midst of all that, we had the big impact of COVID on the economy and the stress that caused for municipal budgets. Mm-hmm. And so even if philosophically people weren't in favor of defunding the police, where were you going to get the money? And then couple that with labor shortages. Have you guys seen fewer number of people getting into law enforcement, getting the necessary training and so forth to get into the profession?
Yeah, we've seen a drastic decrease in the numbers of applications when we do have an open position. The tech schools have seen a decrease in enrollment for the law enforcement programs. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how to best, recruit new candidates for this job, right?
And what does it take, because there's a little misnomer, and it varies based on the size of the police department, but it doesn't take a 4-year bachelor's degree to become a police officer?
No, in the state of Wisconsin, all that's required to become a police officer is to be 18 years old and have 60 college credits. If you have those two things, you qualify to become a police officer, and then the only thing that's required is the 720 police academy training that you have to go through.
Okay.
One of the things we did to try to spike recruitment and retention was years past, agencies would never pay for someone to go to that academy. So you'd basically have to put yourself through the academy or find a part-time agency that would be willing to sponsor you through the academy to be able to then get hired. We found very early on in 2020 especially that we were going to have to start doing some things to dangle the carrot, so to speak, for people to want to get into this line of work. And we also changed a little bit of our hiring practice and our interview practices, where we were just trying to find the good people, and we can teach people how to be effective, good police officers, but we need good people with good moral compasses and good character first and foremost. We can teach anybody how to be a police officer, but we can't teach those inherent values. So what we ended up doing was starting to hire people and then send them through the academy and pay them while they go. So we hire them as full-time police officers, send them to school. That's basically their job for 18 weeks, and then they'd start their FTO process.
Would it be fair to say, now I want to talk from your personal experience, give people a little bit of your background, because before you joined the Hudson force, you were up in North Hudson.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's correct.
I think you were in North Hudson when I lived in North Hudson. And you were there 5 years.
Yep.
And then hired 17 years ago to be on the Hudson Police Force.
Yep.
And then when Marty Jensen stepped down after 10 years, then you were appointed chief of police.
Yes, that is how that worked. Yep.
Okay, so that's your history. So 22 years in law enforcement. And in that time, would it be safe to say that the education and training necessary for the job has changed quite a bit?
Absolutely. When I went through the police academy, for instance, it was 400 hours. So it was 10 weeks.
Okay.
22 years later, it's 720 hours. It's nearly doubled the amount of training.
Right.
Just to become a police officer, right?
But when the workforce was different, when you had 10 applicants for every job, then that's when people started going to four-year colleges, getting majors in criminal justice, and having that, or psychology, or sociology.
Or sociology.
Right. Those were the common majors that people then would, they needed to do something to set themselves above the pack, right?
Correct. Yep.
But now it's a different economy that we're in. We don't have 10 applicants for every opening. And so what are you doing to attract applicants? One of them was you indicated about paying for the training.
Yep.
But, and it does put a little bit of strain, though, if you're always hiring brand new police officers versus experience. So how do you balance that?
Well, so one of the things we've done is we've changed our union contract to allow for lateral transfers, right? Okay. So if someone has 5 years of experience at another police department and they come over here, once they finish their FTO process, we move them right up to the top of the pay scale. Normally it takes someone 5 years to get to the top of the pay scale.
Okay.
So that is one thing that we've tried to do to get experienced officers here, good officers that just maybe don't want to work in the community that they're in right now, or that want to maybe try and grow in the career, right?
Right.
Because some of the smaller agencies don't have the different details and the different duties that you can do within a police department to really kind of grow. You're either stuck as a patrol officer your entire career, and if you never get promoted because there's one or two supervisors, you know, you're just stuck.
Right.
Another thing that we do quite often is go to all the career fairs at the tech colleges and at the colleges. So we send a couple of our officers out there with some handouts and materials, and just try to interact with them and ask them if they've ever thought about a career in law enforcement. That's been pretty effective, especially at the tech school level.
Okay.
But another thing that we've done is try to have a more positive and more in front presence on social media, or Facebook and Twitter and things like that, because that's where people are spending their time, right? So we try to show them that being a police officer is more than just making traffic stops and making arrests. It's about interacting with your community and engaging in your community and being a part of your community. Right. So those are the things that we've really tried to focus on over the last 3 or 4 years specifically. And it's had a positive impact. We might have, for instance, when I was applying for jobs, there were 100 to 120 applications for one job.
Wow, that many. I was just picking a number out, so I didn't realize I was way under guessing.
Just to put it in perspective, right? And then since I became chief, we would get 40 to 50 to 60 applicants for a job or an eligibility list. This last process that we had 10 applicants.
Wow.
So that shows you kind of how many people are.
The example I used was actually on the low end, about 10% of what they used to get.
Yeah.
Okay.
But out of those 10, we'd be very happy hiring 8, right? Okay. So the people that are applying for the jobs are serious about it.
Right.
And they know what they want to do, and they're good people. So from that respect, it's still okay. Because I'd rather have 10 people apply that I'd like to hire 80% of those people than to have 100 people apply and only think 10% are good.
Right.
It's the same thing.
So how big is the Hudson Police Force? Like how many?
We are 30 sworn.
Okay.
So including myself all the way down, we have 30 officers.
And then how many are those are leadership? Yeah.
There is myself, my lieutenant, and then I have 2 detective sergeants now. I just created an additional detective sergeant, and then 4 patrol sergeants.
Okay.
So there are 7 sergeants, myself and lieutenant. So
there's always a patrol sergeant on duty?
There's always a patrol sergeant scheduled to be on duty.
Okay.
We will have one working every day, but sometimes with vacations and family time and things like that, we don't have enough that we could cover vacancies on the schedule to have a supervisor all the time.
And Hudson is still the police force for just Hudson, unlike the fire department, which has like North Hudson and some
That's correct.
surrounding
Yep,
area.
just the corporate limits of the city of Hudson.
Okay. So how does that work with things that happen at the borders, like whether it's the industrial park or some of, the borders of the city? Is there any kind of partnership with the county?
Oh yeah,
Sheriff's
we
Department?
have a very good partnership with not only the Sheriff's Department here in St. Croix County, or Sheriff's Office I should say, but also the New Richmond Police Department, the River Falls Police Department, the North Hudson Police Department, the Somerset Police Department, right? So if something happens, people are coming.
One example might be some kind of standoff, maybe an armed standoff.
Yeah, like maybe something like what we had just on Tuesday
Okay.
afternoon, right? Where it was an event that started in Ramsey County, Minnesota. So we had Ramsey County, we had Minnesota State Patrol, we had St. Croix County Sheriff's Office, we had New Richmond Police Department, and Hudson Police Department. We're all on scene there. At Wisconsin State Patrol, we have a good relationship with them as well.
Okay.
So our mutual aid agreements allow for us to be able to really keep our staffing kind of on the low side. And I don't want to say it's on the low side because the national average or the national recommendation is 2 officers for every 1,000 people in population.
Okay.
Which at just over 15,000 people in population, the city of Hudson,
We're at
30 officers.
Okay.
It's right on point with where we should be.
But when it comes to equipment investments, you guys don't own tanks or anything like that.
No, we don't own any of that stuff. No,
Yeah.
the Sheriff's Department does for their ERU team, their emergency response unit.
Right.
And with our mutual aid agreements, if something happens in the city, they're very good about coming to assist us.
Okay. The other thing that has changed in the time that you've been in law enforcement is the technology. Never had body cams when you first started.
No, didn't have computers when I first started. Didn't have cell phones in the cars when I first started.
Yes. So what is the impact of all that, and how do we sit? How are you satisfied as far as where we sit with our investments in technology?
We're actually pretty good. When I first started, we didn't have any of that stuff, right? Some of the bigger agencies would start to get a little bit of that, and then we were quite a bit behind the 8 ball, right? Just because we're a smaller community, you have budgets. How are you going to pay for this stuff? Because it's not cheap.
Right.
And especially now when you talk about cloud storage with our body cameras, and then that's what you're paying for. And you have to pay for that annually, right?
So
As
it's
a
the storage
subscription
that costs more than the actual camera itself.
fee. You're absolutely correct. So we've been pretty good and fortunate with the city support to be able to be one of the first agencies, at least in St. Croix County, that have had in-squad cameras, body cameras, computers in every squad car and things like that. So that from that perspective, we've seen a lot of support from the city over the years.
Okay. Well, good. So you feel there's no open positions that are unfilled because of lack of applicants right now or anything like that?
Nope, we have an eligibility list with very qualified candidates on it right now, and we currently don't have any openings on the police department. So we're looking pretty good as far as staffing goes.
And then we mentioned, another thing I'm curious about is how often do you change out the vehicles? I mean, because some of those vehicles get a lot of miles on them.
They get a lot of miles on them very quickly. So another thing, when I first started, 22 plus years ago, we had 2 cars. So we had 2 officers working day shift, 2 officers working afternoons and midnights, and we had those 2 cars. They were running all 3 shifts all day long, every day. We'd have to cycle them out every year.
Okay.
So as we started to grow our patrol fleet a little bit, we were able to hang on to some of those cars a little bit longer. So if a car goes in for service, you're not out anything, right? And we also have more people. So we have more shifts working every day. We have supervisors that need cars to be able to respond from their residents if they're on call or if they get called out, in the middle of the night so that they don't have to drive a personal vehicle into the police department and then get their car and come out. So we've been able to do that, which allows us to hang on to cars for between 7 and 8 years.
Okay.
We try to cycle the car out when it gets to 100,000 miles.
Very good. And we have a big event coming up. We're taping this episode right now on Thursday, June 29th, and Booster Days starts tomorrow.
Booster Day started today.
It started today officially.
Carnival started today.
Carnival started today. People start coming in from out of town. Parade day is a massive amount of people, unless it gets excessively hot, and it is supposed to be warm.
It's supposed to be a warm day.
But anybody that's been in the Booster Parade understands it's going to be warm. What do you do different on Parade Day, for example?
So Parade Day is almost an all-call for everybody that works for the police department is working in some kind of form or fashion.
Okay.
Every street has to be blocked off with, squad cars or barricades, and feeder streets also have to be directed around it, right? So you have a major highway that you're shutting down right through downtown, and then a detour, right? So it takes some coordination. We've been doing it for several years, so it's the same thing every year. We know where we're going to be. We know where we need help. We know, how it's going to play out. So it's not that big of a deal, but it takes everybody. It takes everybody.
What about fireworks night?
Fireworks night is the same thing, maybe less people. We still have staff officers in the park and on the Dyke Road and down in the fireworks ground and in the carnival and things like that. But we don't have necessarily all of the traffic concerns that we have on such a parade day.
Right.
Leaving the fireworks is another story, right?
Right.
Where we need to jump out there and help people get out and direct some traffic to get back out onto the highway to get out of town. But
so you actually have foot patrol officers for Booster Days?
Yeah, all weekend. Yeah. Downtown and in the park.
Which leads me to my next. It's kind of free interview here. You gave me free reign to ask you questions. And facilities, like the location of the police department. Obviously, it got super overcrowded when, I don't know if you were even on the force when it was down in City Hall.
Oh, I was.
Yeah, that was incredibly cramped. And now, obviously, we've got a nice building there, shared space with the library, so to speak. But there's been a lot of talk about moving you guys. We've moved the fire department. Now the other part of public safety is the police. So, where does that stand right now? Is it still under study? And
right now, it's still under study. The study has been completed. We used an architect to do a study and a design feasibility study and things like that on the site that that the city has identified for us to go. Right now, it's in the pricing stage to see how much it would cost to build a facility on that site. So once those numbers come in, then we'll have a little bit better idea of how long out we'll.
I'm sorry, and that proposed site is where?
Right next to the fire department.
Okay.
So the old, where the old garages are for the old golf course,
right,
are taken up by Public Works right now. So the thought is that when they get a building, they'll be able to move out of there, and then we'll be able to take over that space.
Okay. Now, is there any thought of keeping some presence in the downtown or not?
As far as like a satellite office or something,
right.
Probably not. We'll still, obviously, that's one of our major patrol areas is the downtown area, so we're still going to have a pretty heavy presence down there. But I think a more centralized location would help with public access to our facility as well. So.
Right. Well, you got that whole southeast new part of the city, if you will, south of the interstate and then east of Carmichael.
Right.
And those areas, that gets to be kind of a long haul when you're coming from downtown.
It's a long haul when you're coming from downtown. It could be a 7-8 minute response time emergent to get out there.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a much more centralized location. I know the fire chief's really pleased with their location.
Yeah, that's a perfect location up there.
Yeah. So do you have any stats that you want to share? I mean, because we were kind of going through that off camera, particularly the violent crime. We know the national trends that prior to COVID, crime and violent crime was on the rise from 2018 to 2019. Then COVID hits in 2020, and certain types of crimes went even higher, like domestic violence, because people were locked together and alcohol was still being served.
Yep.
But so, what have you seen in the 5 years that you've been here in Hudson, and where are we at compared to, say, 2019, which was pre-COVID?
Yeah, we have also seen those trends. They went up right before COVID. Certain offenses during COVID went up, and now we're starting to see them kind of come back down. Not a lot. So just for example, total crime in the city in 2019 was 948 offenses. During COVID in 2020, there was 891. Last year in 2022, there was 921 again. So came down a little bit from 2019 numbers, but
Right.
really, I mean, we don't see a lot of increase in one year or a lot of decrease in one year in really any category. And if you go through our annual calls for service, we're within 2 or 3% of every call for service every year, whether it goes up or down.
Okay.
I mean, you could pretty much say, you know, for domestic violence, we're going to have, you know, between 80 and 100 domestic violence cases this year. You know, for armed robberies, we're going to have, you know, between 5 and 8 armed robberies this year. With every category across the board is pretty consistent. You know, we're going to have 700 traffic crashes every year. 50 of those are going to be, you know, personal injury crashes.
Right.
You know, so more or less, I mean, though our calls for service overall continue to go up, the major incidents that we have always stay about the same.
Now, I had asked you this in email when we were preparing, does the city do any surveys of constituents to find out like satisfaction levels with public safety or anything like that?
You know, we did that, I want to say we did that about 8 years ago. We didn't really get a lot of participation in it. I know that I have one sitting on my desk.
Okay.
We've been editing for the last year or so,
Sure.
trying to figure out exactly what we want to do with it. Because it's a little bit, it could be a little bit of a slippery slope too, when you start doing that. So we want to make sure that the survey is right, and then we want to make sure that we have the right delivery method to the community.
Right.
So
Well, that's one, you want the questions to be able to stand the test of time, because that's your best data, is be able to compare it over a period of years. And,
right.
one of the things that's changed in the 5 years that you've been chief is downtown parking. And to just clarify for folks, you guys aren't playing the role of meter maids or...
We are not. So the parking unit used to be under the police department. And when the new parking system came in, it stayed under the police department until the city made the parking utility.
Okay.
Because it was a utility, it's actually kind of illegal for the police department to oversee it, because we can't be in the business of making money
Right.
for the city. So because it was changed to a utility, it had to be moved under different leadership, and now I believe it's under community development.
Okay. And so you only get involved in parking where it presents some kind of public safety hazard or something?
More or less. I mean, people will still call us for any other area around the city for parking issues.
Right.
Handicap parking violations, people park the wrong way on the roadway, people blocking someone's driveway or mailbox, and we'll still take care of that stuff.
Okay.
We also have the snow event parking issues, right, and the 24-hour parking issues where we'll get complaints on, and we'll be the ones that address that. But the downtown parking utility deals with the downtown paid parking pretty much alone.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about personnel, turnover, not too bad in that regard?
Not too bad. Kind of wood.
Yeah. I mean, what's the typical retirement range? You know, what's the minimum to qualify, and where do you see your officers usually retiring out?
So for the state of Wisconsin, you have to have 25 years in and be 50 years old to meet the standards for retirement.
Okay.
Your best bet to retire is you know, 53 or 54 to 55 with that 25 to 30 years of service in. We have seen the people that have retired have been all over 30 years for the last 10 people probably that have retired have all had the over 30 years in. So that's what you hope to see. When you hire someone, you're making essentially a 30-year investment in somebody.
Right.
So that's the goal. We haven't had many people leave to go to other agencies. We haven't had many people leave to go to other career fields. So thankfully, we've been fortunate, because that hasn't been the case for every law enforcement agency.
Now, when I was growing up, which would include the late '60s, police dramas were very popular. Adam 12, and and what was the Jack Webb played,
Dragnet.
Dragnet, thank you. And so, it did make a little bit more glamorous, and then you had, of course, like the Dick Tracy stuff, which started bordering on the comic book stuff. But overall, a different view of major crimes being, solved and so forth. Give us an example of what it's like to be a police officer, and tell us why the emphasis on training in psychology and sociology.
So it's really rewarding being a police officer, but it's a very difficult job. And I say that because you have to wear so many hats, right? We have to be a teacher, we have to be a parent sometimes, we have to be a social worker, we have to be a doctor, there's many things that you have to do inside one shift, right? You have to be an English scholar to write some of these reports sometimes, right? So the training is not just narrowly focused. You have to have training in de-escalation, you have to have training in critical incidents, and you have to have training in people in crisis and how to deal with them and how to help them through that. And that is where an emphasis in psychology and sociology will help with that, because you've seen it before, you can maybe relate to it, and not that you're going to try and diagnose it, but sometimes if you have an understanding of what someone might be going through, though you can't necessarily understand what they're going through, you can at least empathize that they're going through some things. And that's the biggest thing to make a personal connection, is be able to empathize with somebody and show compassion, right? And that's where kind of that.
Now, it's one thing to have that training, but the other thing is the experience, right? I mean, putting it in action, and people don't understand, I think to a large degree, the amount of discretion that the job requires and should. There's been a big movement in the last 10 years to take away discretion from various aspects of the criminal justice system, whether it's judges, prosecutors, or even police officers. And why is that not a good thing for criminal justice?
If you start saying everything is black and white, right? If this, then this must occur. You take away the ability to be a human. Right? To be a human being and bring back that empathy and compassion, right? Not everything that someone's doing, even if it's criminal sometimes, they might be doing it for a reason. And to just say that everybody needs another fine or another warrant or to spend time in jail because of a mistake that they made, I don't think that's a good thing, because it takes away that human component. That
human component makes me think of the movie RoboCop. Where it's just strict enforcement, and or even Judge Dredd or whatever that Sylvester Stallone character was, where they're making the judge, jury, and executioner out in the field. So
the biggest part of what we do is educational. Right. So you can't have education by punishing everybody. Right? It's law enforcement, and there's more ways to enforce the laws than just tickets and arrests. So
you can get the point across without throwing the book at somebody a lot of times. And it's, again, what are you striving for? You want a good balance of Hudson having a reputation as a great place to live.
And you want that relationship with the community as well. And if every time they have contact with a law enforcement officer, they're getting a ticket or they're going to jail, well, how good's your relationship going to be?
Well, speaking of where relationships are important, talk a little bit, because we're starting to run out of time, is the school resource officers that we have. We have 2 now, and I know we had a presentation where they said that having a third would be really good. But why is it important to have police officers in schools? When you're looking at the size, we have the largest middle school in the state, and
one of the largest high school too. It's building relationships. It's what it's all about, is building relationships, mentoring students, letting these people know that law enforcement aren't the bad guys, that it's okay to talk to them about anything. It doesn't have to be a criminal matter. We're people too. So kind of humanizing the badge a little bit, This is what we've chosen as our career field, but it doesn't mean that you can't talk to us. And building that relationship so that when they grow up to have positive experiences with law enforcement, and then they have children of their own, and they can teach their children that you can have positive interactions and relationships with law enforcement, and it doesn't make you a bad person. That's what it's all about, and it's for make those kids feel safe and to make those kids feel like they have someone that they can talk to if they need to.
Do your resource officers do any subtle or subliminal recruiting of people into law enforcement by having that positive image?
Sometimes. We have our Explorer program that is affiliated with our police department, and the recruiting from that comes right out of the high school.
Okay.
We've actually hired 3 former Explorers that are now police officers with the city.
Excellent.
So
That's
it's a great recruiting tool.
Does the public, do they have an opportunity? I remember you used to do that pre-COVID. I don't know, since COVID, have you done where they get to see what it's like to be a
Citizens Police Academy?
Yeah, Citizens Police.
Yeah, we brought that back last year.
Okay.
So we've kicked that back off. This summer, we're actually doing a juvenile police academy.
Okay.
So kids can
So you got
come
Police
and learn about it.
Explorers, which is one avenue, and then now you got this Police Academy. And how would an adult apply for something like that? And do you have a waiting list?
There is no waiting list. They would just contact our office and say that they're interested in participating in the next Citizens Police Academy. Well, we hold one academy every year.
Okay.
It's usually held in the fall of the year. It gets started about September. We try to finish it up before Thanksgiving so that we don't run into people's holiday plans. And it runs about 10 weeks.
Okay.
So it's every Tuesday or Thursday night from 6 o'clock until 9 in the evening. And
great. Well, I hope that that one way that the people watching this can, if they really want to get involved and see what it's like to be a police officer from that angle.
Absolutely.
That's a good opportunity. And there was one final point that I was going to make is the public who are watching this. We've heard through TSA, and everything, if you see something, say something.
That's great.
Do you have some type of reporting tipster line so that it would avoid people calling 911? What is that mechanism for City of Hudson?
We really don't have anything like that. Right now, you still have to call and make a report. You could send an email. We're still going to call you and try to get information about what you want to complain about. But the most effective thing, if you see something to say something, is just call 911.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if it's not necessarily an emergency. It goes to the same dispatchers anyway. So if you're worried about having to look up the non-emergency line for dispatch, just call 911. That's the most effective way.
Final thing here before we sign off. Are you willing to, we really appreciate coming in, by the way, and this is really fun to do. If there's organizations out there that want to, have you speak to their group, are you willing to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And how do they get a hold of you to do that?
They just give me a call. Give me a call at the police department. Send me an email.
What's the number for the non-emergency number at the police department?
715-386-4771.
4771. Got it.
4771.
All right. Well, Chief Willems, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
It's good to be here.
And it's great to see you out in the community, and I see you every once in a while at different events, especially in school. But anyway, we appreciate your presence. We appreciate the service. Thank you very much for the service you do for City of Hudson.
No, thank you very much.
All right. And I want to thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.